We will then, at this stage, we now up in the gear now, we're moving now into the third session, our session 3, where we have the teacher unions, all the teacher unions that are here, PEU, SAO, NATU, NAPTOSA, and SATU. The role of teacher unions in combating sexual harassment and GBV in the workplace. What role are the teacher unions playing and so forth as part of the very important stakeholders in education? As we call upon Ms. Mate Khamantsana to present on behalf of PEU. As I introduced to you, yes, before you come over, as I introduced to you, Ms. Mateka, Constance Manzana was born in Hamapata Medi village in Bulubedu, Limpopo, and she's affectionately known as Koni within the PEU cycles. She's currently serving as the National Gender Chairperson for Professional Educators Union PEU since 2019, after having served the union as sports, arts and culture in branches, district, as well as at the provincial level. From 1990, she holds a flowing qualifications, secondary teacher's diploma from Mochachi College, BA degree from University of the North, certificate in advanced labor law from UNISA, and ACE in English from the Northwest University. Leadership, you are in your hands, Memateka. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Maybe before I start, let me start by acknowledging the presence of our Minister, our Deputy Minister, the DG, all provincial leadership from different provinces in the Department of Education, speakers that presented before me, my colleagues in the union, and let me use the language of the union and say all protocol observed. I'm requested to come and present on the role of teacher unions in combating sexual harassment and gender-based violence in a workplace. As you can see, the first slide, we are here, and the reason why we are engaging on this matter. We are saying, as PEU, Professional Educators Union, do not ignore the signs. Speak up, get help. Women are human beings and they feel the pain. You can see the first slide. Her mouth is closed. It indicates that she's suffocating. She cannot breathe. She cannot say anything. Now we are saying, do not ignore the sign. And we are presenting this in Women's Month, recognizing our leader, Charlotte Mateke, and saying we need to realize the women's rights. Let's move the slide. Amongst other things that I'm going to engage on, can I request that you move the slide for me, that side? Yes, that is the slide on Women's Month, and then we are saying the year of Charlotte Mateke and realizing women's rights. Let's move to the next slide. I will engage on the quotation that she once made to say, this work is not for yourself, kill the spirit of self and do not live above your people, but live with them. And if it's possible, bring someone up with you. Like I indicated, I'm representing the Professional Educators Union and on this topic. Let's move on. On the next slide, we are going to discuss. On the next slide, we are going to discuss the following. I'm going to touch on the sexual harassment, the gender-based violence, the workplace, the challenges that are there in the workplace, and lastly, I will touch on the issue of the role of the union as PEU. Now, we start with this is the overview of what I'm going to discuss with you. That is sexual harassment, that is gender-based violence, that will be workplace, yes, and that will be challenges in the workplace, and lastly, it will be the role of the union. And when it comes to sexual harassment, what are we saying is sexual harassment? We are saying, let's move the slide. We are saying sexual harassment is an unwelcome act. As you can see, the next slide indicating to say it's an unwelcome act, and that unwelcome act is causing some pain and it's hurting to the person that action is taking place on. Now, we are saying sexual harassment is an unwelcome act. Whenever you do whatever act that you do and the person is unwelcoming that, just stop, because it indicates to say the person is not appreciating what you are doing to him or to her. Let's move to the next slide. Let's move to the next slide. And the next slide, that is where we indicate to say unwelcome physical and or verbal or non-verbal conduct. That is what we term sexual harassment. And when it comes to gender-based violence, what is it? As you can see, we have seen a fist there to say that is a harmful act. And that harmful act, it's a serious violation of human rights. It erodes the protection and the safety of an individual. And in all cases, it is threatening the life and the health of the person that harmful act is done on. Let's move to the next slide. The next slide will be addressing the issue of a workplace. And what is a workplace in our scenario as educators? As educators, our workplace will be a school. And we are saying a school is a place where our learners, our kids, are receiving formal education. We are not saying it's a place where sexual harassment or gender-based violence need to take place. We are saying it's where formal education needs to take place. And if it's possible, I was listening to the speaker in the morning, Ndadeshai, when he was talking from his organization of Kulumandoda. Then I said, I think it's high time that in our schools, we need to start to have Bukulumandoda. We start to talk to our young boys, because in most cases, gender-based violence, sexual harassment, the victims are girls, the victims are our young girls, and the victims are young teachers, the ladies, the women in our workplace. Then if we can have our Bukulumandoda in our schools, then we will be able, to combat this serious problem. And then let's go on to the next slide. The next slide will be on the challenges that I identified, some of the challenges, not all of them, because my colleagues in the union will also, in other unions, will also touch on them. But the few that I identified, one of them is teenage pregnancy. When we reopened our schools on the 26th last month, 2 weeks down the line, there was a circular indicating to say we need statistics of young of those young girls who fell pregnant during this era. And something came to my mind to say, now we are looking for statistics for young girls who fell pregnant. And even if we agree to say teenage pregnancy is a societal problem, but it is also an educational challenge. These young girls, sometimes they fell pregnant at school by their peer or by educators, and again at home by those people who are supposed to protect them as their parent. And here we are as the Department of Education, we say, give us the statistics of those girls who are pregnant. The question in my mind was, they are the victims. And where are the perpetrators? When are we going to see a circular coming out and saying we need to see to get the numbers of those of those males who impregnated these young girls? When I was looking at the invitation on this presentation, I looked at the presenters from the union. Then it was a lineup of women. I said, are we not overloading the victim section? Because in most cases, these unwanted or harmful acts are done on us. We are the victims. And here we are today sitting, trying to come up with the solutions. And who are the doers? Where are the doers of these actions? Maybe because we are promised to say, this is not the first and the last engagement. In the next engagement, we will hear the other gender coming over and sharing with us how they are going to assist the victims, because really the hands are full for the victims. We are trying this, we are trying that, but it doesn't stop. Even when we try to say stop it, it doesn't stop. Let's hope the Department of Education will line up the other gender as they will be coming to share with us how they intend to solve this kind of a problem. Another challenge that I identified is the education-learner relationship, which I agree to say, as a country, we have the laws. We have bodies that are regulating the working environment, the school environment, to try and say, this is not allowed. We cannot have a situation where an educator is having an affair with a learner. And in my mind, I'm saying a learner is a minor. And the adult here, uchaba challenge, is afraid of the challenge, and it's imposing his or her power and dominance over the young child. They are grooming this child, but nonetheless, we are saying it's a challenge that we have recognized, and we are saying, as a union, there's something that we do on the other side, as I'll be indicating the role of the union in this regard. And then we have harassment within and outside the workplace. Attendees to this engagement, we have a serious problem where we find there is harassment within the workplace and even outside the workplace. When I say within the workplace, it's where you find it's a harassment between an educator and an educator. They do happen in every day of the contact in the work session. And besides that, the educator also is having an harassment outside the school premises, wherein we know as educators, we are in our workplaces, but again, we are members of the society. What is happening in the society do affect us. We are also members of the families. And at times you find an educator is coming from an abused environment from a home and come to a school, come and meet the learners in a class that are about 40 or 50 that are coming from different background, exposed to different gender-based violence action and sexual harassment. And this teacher also is having his or her own baggage. And all those things are expected from the teacher to come up and resolve them. And it's also a member of the society. When he goes out to the society, the teacher, he or she is labeled other. So teachers are also overburdened by the challenges that are there. The next one, it will be the structural level violence or structural harassment. In this one, I referred to higher offices to lower offices. Some of the decisions that are taken by higher offices to be implemented by lower offices, on their own, they cause stress to the workforce on the ground. Now, some of the workforces on the ground and the workforces on the lower offices of the higher offices, some of the decisions really are causing a lot of stress to the workforce. And out there, people will be saying, but teachers like being absent to work. They are always in hospitals. They are not considering that some of the decisions that are taken are affecting them seriously. And the next one is the gender position pandemic. With this one, I'll explain in a sentence. There are managers out there that cannot take decisions until they have consulted. Yes, we can say we need gender to be equal, but gender to be equal by just being there, not being able to take the right decision when the action is currently there and waiting for someone to approve, it becomes a problem. You can imagine what will be the situation if a situation is at a school level and the manager at that moment cannot take a decision just because the second manager, who's of a different gender, it's not there to take the to instruct the decision. And that on its own, the work on the force, it's waiting for the decision because the situation is for now. But we are still waiting for somebody maybe who's in a meeting like now to come back and give a decision. It will be tomorrow. Those who are affected by that action at that moment obviously will remain being stressed. Normalizing harassment, normalizing harassment and comfort in harassment. There are those who are normalizing the issue of harassment. One speaker one time said, the best weapon for an abused is the mind of the abused. In other words, the abuser is using the mind of the abused to abuse the abused. So there are some people who enjoy the harassment cycle. When you start asking questions, they will have that statement to say, who do you think you are to can ask title so and so a question? And whereas you are seeing the problem at the ground and you are saying, this is a problem and let's address to it. But because people have normalized the harassment, then you are not supposed to ask questions because you cannot ask this title. Majority abused harassment. The majority of the working forces on the ground are feeling the heat. The majority on the ground that are doing the spade work are feeling the heat on the ground. With point 3, 4, 5, and 6 mentioned, we will all agree to say the majority on the ground are feeling the heat. On daily basis, on weekly basis, we have those teachers that can't take anymore, those educators that cannot take it anymore, and they resort to high absenteeism, sick leaves, and some of them are even in internet. They're having access to all these kind of things that some of us as parents we are unable to reach. the technology where they can reach. But now we are saying bullying will never be allowed. Let's try and assist in our schools. And we also do have the good legislations. We do have the laws. We do have the conventions. For instance, one of the speakers indicated Convention 190 of the ILO. But are they assisting? Are they coming to our assistance? Let's move to the next slide, as I will be talking to the roles of us as unions. What is it that we do after we have explained what we understand by sexual harassment, after we have explained what we mean by gender-based violence, all the challenges that we have there, and all the structural and the community and all the challenges that we have indicated. What are the roles and the responsibilities of us as unions? As a union, or as unions, we act. Let's move to the next slide. As a union, we act as counselors to the affected. We are acting as counselors to the affected. We open a safe space for the affected to be able to speak out, to create an open space for the affected, whether educators or learners, to speak out and be able to share their pain and be able to share their experience. And we give them the counseling and try and advise them to say, these are the avenues that you can exhaust for you to be able to resolve whatever that happened to you. Again, we act as mediators. As a union, we have a huge task, because we are the teacher representatives, we are also parents, we are also employees. Now, we become mediators between the employees who are affected, the learners that are affected as our tools that we work with, and the employer who employed us, and also the stakeholders, so that they must get one another. They must be able to reach one another. In some cases, we end up in the mediatory position. We end up in sections such as the ELRC, like they indicated, in bodies such as the SACE, wherein we are trying to bring the employees, the employer, and the stakeholders together to say, this is how we need to move forward. Hence, we are saying we maintain, or we are the mediator in this regard. And again, as a union, we empower our people. That is our role. We empower our officials. We give them education. We encourage our union members to say, you need to acquire more knowledge on how to deal with issues of sexual harassment, issues of gender-based violence, and you need to register and study more and know more about the laws that regulate your working conditions, so that you are able to give the counseling, you are able to mediate when time it's right. And again, we give them an awareness screen. We create a platform of awareness to say to them, whenever this kind of a situation happens to you, to an educator, to a learner, this unwanted or unwelcome act or behavior, if it comes around you, it's within your space, you must be able to be aware and say, this is sexual harassment. This is gender-based violence. I need to stop this person. This person must not come into my space. This person must be at that space far from me, so that the person must not harm me or cause any unwanted behavior around me. We are the defenders of the human rights. As unions, we defend the human rights. We empower our people. We bring about awareness, and we say, let's have the policies that will regulate the workspace that we find ourselves. In our schools, we need to have policies. We need to organize awareness a campaign. We need to empower our educators and also our learners, so that they must know when these unwanted, these unwelcome behaviors, when they come around them, they must be able to speak out. They must be able to share, to go to the people that they trust most and say, this is what transpired, this is what happened to me, and I don't want this. Teacher so and so, educator so and so, or gardener so and so, those assistants, all those people that we have around our school environment that are working, if they're doing, or even somebody at home in communities, they're doing this. Our kids need to be empowered and be able to speak out. And in terms of the educators, they need to follow the policies and know those policies. And when those policies are done, they are not supposed to be in shelves. They need to be shared with the educators so that they know the do's and the don'ts. And we serve as ambassadors to external bodies. We do take part in organizations such as Gender at Work, even though what I've realized is the participation is so low. We also take part in Commission for Status of Women. Again, the participation is so low. And all I'm saying is, even if the participation is low, today I'm happy because our department organized this kind of an engagement. And in this kind of an engagement, we are starting to talk. We are starting to say, let's talk, let's engage, because those on the ground, the learners and the educators, are feeling the heat. They are harassed. They need to know where to go when time is right. Now, I'm saying I'm happy because here we are today as Department of Education addressing the matter. Let it not stop here. Let's continue and engage and invite those with knowledge and be able to give us knowledge so that we are able to face all the challenges that we have. Those are the roles and the responsibilities that we have as unions. As we will be moving to the next slide, and I will be concluding my presentation, I'm saying the roles and the responsibilities of unions. It's for us to be counselors, mediators, empower our stakeholders, create awareness space, defenders of human rights, and we become defenders of human rights. In my conclusion, I want us to take this opportunity and say to our young girl, the Mtabeni girl, and say, young girl, rest in peace. We are here engaging, and I'm saying to myself and to all the attendees here, and say, what is going on? If patriarchy means this, then it means patriarchy is a cancer that needs to be attended. You ask yourself a question and say, whoever did this to our young girl, what was going on in his head? And not only in his head, and also in his trousers. Because honestly, no one can be allowed to go on and do these kind of things to our women, and we keep quiet. And unfortunately, Mtabeni, it's another number that we add to the numbers that we have. They continue to attack us. They continue to kill us. They continue to turn our bodies into a crime scene. And yet they expect us to come up with solutions. We are the victims here. And we are saying, like I indicated, Next time, let those who are doing this kind of things, the gender that is coming up with this kind of things, bring the solutions, because as this gender, we tried everything. Even now, we are still shouting to the top of our voices to say, stop it, it's hurting us, it's painful. But they continue to kill us and turn our bodies into crime scenes. Let them come up with solutions. Without them, we will not win this. Let's bring them on board. Let them engage, talk to us and tell us what is really their problem so that we are able to resolve this. Rest in peace, Mtabeni girl, and thank you, attendees.
Thank you very much for that clarity that you have given in respect of what PEU is doing to combat this pandemic against our learners and against the women and other children. Thank you very much. Let me just remind the other presenters to switch on their cameras. We missed out to see Mematera because her camera was off. Let's switch on our cameras as we call upon Mevrouw Marina Beselen from the South Afrikaanse Onderwysers Unie. And as I introduce her, Marina Beselen is an activist for the equal treatment of all genders in education. As a spokesperson for the union, she has focused her attention on raising gender awareness and ensuring equality in the sector. She currently holds the position of the sectional head of the division Professional Services at the South Afrikaanse Onderwysers Unie. In this position, she has addressed the issue of gender equality during training and newsletters. She is currently the convener of SAO Personnel Wellness Committee, which focuses on issues related to gender and workplace functionality. As part of the review for BEd studies, she directed her attention on domestic abuse in South Africa and the role that gender plays in violence. Mevrouw Marina, we're all yours.
Program Director, thank you very much, much appreciated. I am going to follow my colleague of PEU's example, and I'm going to say all protocol observed. Ladies and gentlemen in our midst, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this very important issue and also to give the perspective of what the unions do to assist in this whole project. You had the theme for this session as do not ignore the signs. And I think that in terms of reading the signs and developing strategies and procedures to ensure that the signs are adhered to, actually makes it an interesting time in South Africa to look at this. Program Director, if we can move to the next slide. Just one back, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. We looked at what the definition for gender-based violence is, and we saw that, and it has been mentioned in several of the presentations that we heard this morning, is that it can be any harmful act which is directed at an individual, and in some instances also groups of individuals that we have. We see that it is about gender inequality, the abuse of power and harmful norms. Now, we were very excited when we heard the presentation on the various legislation which is now going for approval in various structures, because the abuse of power lies in the policies that we have within the country. At the moment that the policies and procedures are in place, it will actually provide a better opportunity for everyone to communicate on what is happening within our system. The most important part is that the health and protection of the whole community should be our concern within this country. Next slide, please. You'll see there that various types of gender-based violence is considered. We've already heard extensively, and we saw that beautiful input this morning, on sexual abuse and on physical abuse. A lot of the presenters have already mentioned mental abuse, and I would like to focus on economic abuse. Especially for women, this is one area that provides a lot of concerns within the system. Being cut off from any financial support, being unable to have something financially to fall back on, keeps a lot of women in submission, and this allows them the opportunity to actually address the sexual, physical, or mental gender-based violence which is conducted against them. If we look at the domestic abuse rates in South Africa as well, we see that there's a huge concern that financial discrepancies, also in our power structures, does not allow for women to be free of various relationships, which is not conducive to this. So therefore, for a union specifically, the financial equality in the education system is a key concern. It is important that women are not that there's no discrepancies in the financial equality within our system, and that it should be equal pay for equal work, which is something that our sisters have fought for a long time during the struggle. The protection of equality and representativity in appointment of teachers remains a concern for the unions as well. And this is what we work towards, is to ensure that there is equality for everybody in the appointment of teachers. And could we just go back to that one? My apologies, just one back. And therefore it is important for a union to play its role in ensuring that the structures are in place to ensure this equality within our teachers. It's also important that there should be protection of all teachers in the workplace. So we've heard the presentation by SACE this morning, which focused on professionalism of teachers. And this is one of the great saving graces within our system, is if we have a professional conduct towards teachers, we are ensured that violence and gender-based violence against our teachers and against our learners can actually be combated. It's also important to empower our teachers to ensure that they have financial and employment stability. In this period of COVID, we have now seen a new term which circulates, and that is called a she-cession, a recession where women are actually negatively impacted on. Women losing their positions, losing their jobs because of comorbidities and other issues that they have in health and in functioning. And therefore, it's important to buffer this and ensure that employment stability is provided for the mothers in our system, for the women in our system, and to make sure that the gender abuse issue can be addressed. It's also important to ensure that there's structures of support for teacher equality. We've heard quite a few examples of gender-based violence today, and it is tremendously important that there be structures in place where people can voice the signs of abuse that is happening within the system and where they can expect to be helped and supported. It's also very important that we advocate human rights. The LGBTQI community is an important part of our community, and advocating these human rights become a key concern because it also ensures that we have human rights in the whole of the community. If we can move to the next slide, please. So the empowerment of women in leadership becomes a fantastic opportunity. We have heard the presentations of our minister and our deputy minister, both very strong women who become the giants on which the other women in leadership in education stand. And with examples such as those, is empowering leadership for women becomes such a wonderful opportunity to actually ensure that they are no longer shackled by the past and by the power structures of the past, which keeps them in dominance. If we look then at empowering leadership, it's also important that there's no gender discrimination. How do we know that there's discrimination? Only when we are made aware of it as such. It's also very important for the SAOU to ensure that we have early campaigns to orientate students to the profession before they become appointable, and on focusing on skills which will ensure their mental and their physical safety within the education system. We have seen in the media recently that DED is now going to focus on trying to break down the barriers with students already to ensure that these students do not become part of an existing cycle of violence against women and violence against children, which is perpetuated within our system. It's also very important that there are support structures for newly appointed teachers and to allow them to build resilience in teaching. We've heard of some of the instances where young teachers, beginner teachers, are being groomed for sexual violence, and therefore it's very important that we start to empower not only students but also newly appointed teachers. Next slide, please. So for us, it's very important to say that any abuse by power structures which leads to the domination based on gender is a grave concern, and that it's necessary for us to relook these power structures to ensure equitable norms, policies, and gender balance. I wish you well with the rest of your symposium, and I hope that next year we can continue this discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Baie dankie mevrou, that was kort en bondig.
Yeah,
certainly we will continue. Like I've indicated that this is the beginning of the good things to come, that I'll still reiterate, nothing beats the power of dialogue. We will continue engaging with one another on some of these vexing issues, so that at the end of the day, we eliminate and we smoke out all these perpetrators. Thank you very much, Marina. As we usher in Ms. Cynthia Barnes, the General Secretary of NATU, Ms. Cynthia Barnes, who's passionate about the teaching profession and an avid philanthropist, obtained her senior teacher's diploma from eSekelweni College of Education in 1992. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree and her honors respectively at the University of Zululand. Cynthia went on to do advanced labor law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, attained her conflict management certificate and leadership development certificate at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. January 2019 was the dawn of her appointment, of course, as the first female General Secretary of the National Teachers Union, the position she currently occupies. Mrs. Barnes, we are all yours. Share with us your experiences, share with us what NATU has to give us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I'm Cynthia Barnes. Cynthia Barnes, okay? Maybe before I go on to my introduction, let me first greet the Minister, that is Mrs. Angie Mosaga, with the Deputy Dr. Mohaul, as well as the MECs that are present and the HODs from all the provinces, as well as the leaders from the unions. Maybe if I can just say all protocol observed. May you please just move up, please, another second slide. May you please just move the slide? Thank you very much. For example, we were given the topic or the title as it reads, I quote, the role of teacher unions in combating sexual harassment and gender-based violence in the workplace. I have shortened this title to read, I quote, the role of teacher unions in combating gender-based violence in the workplace, unquote, because sexual harassment is part of gender-based violence. So it is tautological or redundant to include this term in the title. Slide, please. My presentation will follow like how I've said here, the order of presentation. The first one will be the introduction, most common forms of GBV, consequences frequently associated with GBV, reasons for tackling GBV in the workplace, harassment, sexual harassment, the role of teacher unions in combating GBV in the workplace. Next slide, please. I would like to introduce this topic in this way. In general, schools in South Africa have been characterized as unsafe places insofar as gender-based violence, that is GBV, is concerned. Over the years, there have been many reports about teachers who have abused their positions and engaged in acts of GBV, particularly having sexual relations with school children. And most of them have been taken to court, and some of them are not working as we speak. The Gender Equity Task Team reports of 1997 highlighted the significance of addressing GBV in South African schools and the idea that education must play a dual role in relation to the discrimination and gendered or sex-based harassment and violence. Next slide, please. Considering that there are varying levels of parental engagement across South African schools, many parents are not able to work with teachers on matters related to the behavior and conduct of their children at school. For example, we can see that there are many parents that actually, not to say they don't care about their children, but they don't have time because most of them are working. Whenever they come back to home, they are tired to go to school whenever they are being called to come and engage with the teacher. So maybe that is what happens in the environment and in the home environment. Moreover, parents who live in rural areas are steeped in a culture that informs beliefs and ways of relating to each other across the various boundaries, including gender, age, and sex. Therefore, interventions which are aimed at altering people's cultures by telling or requiring them to adjust their socio-cultural norms in respect of the long-established roles and positions of girls and boys in those communities for the purpose of addressing gender-based violence and inequality could be futile. Next slide, please. Presently, there are no means to raise awareness of gender-based violence, identifying and naming its different forms and how to respond to or address such behavior, but also how to ensure that school is a safe space for all. It is important to point out from the onset that although GBV is often targeted at women and girls, men and boys are targeted as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Before presenting the 10 actions by which teacher unions could assist the school system to combat GBV, I have first reflected on a number of antecedent issues to help the audience contextualize these 10 actions. However, because of limitation of time, these antecedental issues are not covered in this presentation. Safe to say that some are reflected in Figure 1. Next slide, please. Then I'm having most common forms of GBV. The first one is sexual harassment. Second, physical or physiological. Third, emotional and physiological torture. Fourth, harmful traditional practices. And then the last one is socioeconomic hardship. The consequences frequently associated with GBV. For example, we find that if this takes place, then these are the consequences that results from this torture that the learners, or well as the teachers, are faced with. The first one can be fatal, which is might be the homicide, suicide, maternal mortality, infant mortality, and HIV and AIDS. Acute physical, that is injury, including fistulas, shock, disease, infection. Then chronic physical, disability, chronic pain or infections, gastrointestinal problems, eating or sleeping disorders, alcohol or drug abuse, reproductive, miscarriage, unwanted pregnancy, unsafe abortion, STDs include HIV and AIDS, menstrual disorders, pregnancy complications, gynecological disorders, and sexual disorders. So these are the consequences which come up whenever a person is being tortured. Okay, another one is emotional and psychological, which are post-traumatic stress, depression, anger, anxiety, and fear, shame, self-hate, and self-blame, mental illness, suicidal thoughts and behavior, socioeconomic, blaming of the victim or survivor, loss of role or functions in society, social stigma, rejection and isolation, feminization of poverty, increased gender inequalities, loss of livelihood and economic dependency, arrest, detention, and or punishment. Next slide, please. Reason for tackling GBV in the workplace. There are 3 reasons why it is important to tackle GBV in the workplace. The first one being, next slide, human rights. The International Labour Organization, that is ILO, uses a right-based approach to gender-based violence, which violates victims' fundamental human rights as articulated in the 1948 UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These principles are included in Articles 1, 3, and 5. Article 1, I quote, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, which means, unquote, which means everyone, there's no one that is free to do anything or to harm anybody, because the human being is God's creature. So therefore, if you harm that body, that means you are also tampering with God. Article 3, I quote, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person, unquote. And then the last one, that is Article 5. And I quote, no one shall be subjected to torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, unquote, just like the lady that has passed on. Then we move on to number 2, that is business case. In addition to pain and suffering caused by GBV, direct financial costs include those resulting from victims, absenteeism and turnover, illness and accidents, disability, or even death. Indirect costs include the victims' decreased functionality and performance, quality of work, and timely production. For example, if teachers at school are being abused or they are being tortured, then they can't perform their work properly. Even as if you look at the learners as well, you'll find the learner sleeping in class, whereas the learner has been abused sexually, maybe at home or at school by a colleague, by a teacher, or by a learner. In the case of schools, GBV can negatively affect 1. Motivation and commitment among teachers. Teachers' loyalty to the teaching profession as a result of working in toxic school environment. The public image of the school, teacher and or learner absenteeism. And the last one, openness to innovation and quality of teaching. Next slide, please. Advantage of workplace-related initiatives. While government are responsible for ensuring that national legislation and institutional frameworks address workplace violence, the workplace itself is recognized as a relevant context in which this matter can be adequately addressed with a view to prevention. Through participatory approaches, workers and managers can successfully overcome many work-related problems they often face through discussions, well-designed human resources policies, and through collective bargaining. In the case of teaching, strong commitment of both teacher unions and education department is instrumental in progressively reducing the incidence of workplace GBV. Harassment, if you look at the term harassment, what is harassment? The term harassment refers to any behavior that is threatening, annoying, or illegal, causing potential or actual physical or emotional suffering. In the general case, harassment manifests in the following ways: repeatedly watching the victim outside or near her or his house, workplace, school or business premises, or any place where she or he happens to be, constantly phoning the victim or causing another person to phone the victim, whether or not the caller speaks to the complainant. That is taken from Morad and Ali and Yan in 2021. Next slide, please. Sexual harassment. As a special case of GBV, sexual harassment deserves a special mention, largely due to its prevalence in the workplace. It is recognized as discrimination on the grounds of gender or sex as a breach of the principle of equal treatment between men and women. That is Rectify 2017-1821. It comprises 3 separate dimensions, that is gender harassment, unwanted sexual attention, and sexual coercion. It is categorized by insulting, misogynistic, and degrading remarks and behavior that are not designed to elicit sexual cooperation, but that convey hostility and degrading attitudes towards women. Next slide, please. In the workplace, sexual harassment is defined as any unwanted sexual advance, requests for sexual favors, either expressly or in writing, or physical conduct of a sexual nature, or sexually demeaning attitudes, causing interference with work performance, or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment, or the attempt to punish the complainant for refusal to comply to such a request, or is made to a condition for employment. The Protection Against Harassment of Women and at Workplace Act 2010. For example, here we look, may I please just go back a little? For example, here we look at this sexual harassment whereby when a person needs to have a job or a senior position, then is being harassed by the person that is on top in order for the person to get that particular position. And even at school, maybe you find that the learner is a gifted learner, maybe wants to pass, and then the teacher will say, in order for you to obtain these marks, let me have this with you so that I can give you the marks. So those are the things that are really making this sexual harassment to be a very strong thing that is hectic to our own kids as well as to the teachers themselves. Okay, next slide. Next slide, okay. The role of teacher unions in combating GBV in the workplace. Figure 1 below shows a model for combating GBV advanced in this presentation. The model shows that combating GBV is a shared responsibility among the state, employer, and as a case in point, the teacher unions. So here we have to work hand in glove, that is the state, the employer, as well as the teacher union, in order for us to be able to deal with this and then to be able to help our own system to function in a very good way. Therefore, all these three bodies must work cooperatively and collaboratively for GBV to be defeated. Next slide. So these are the three dimensions I was talking about. The shared model for combating GBV, what the states needs to do. The state here must take all necessary legislative, administrative, judicial, and other measures to prevent, investigate, and punish acts of GBV in public and private spaces. The employer, on the other hand, working hand in glove with the state, must also create relevant GBV policy frameworks and strategies to protect workers with clear consequences for GBV-related misconducts. Teacher unions, as NATO, we are saying, must ensure GBV-sensitive policies are in place and are implemented in schools, play advocacy role on all GBV matters in schools. Next slide, please. Roles of teacher unions still continues here. So here we need to promote GBV risk management, ensure the incorporation of GBV sensitive policies, procedures, processes, and ethics into the consciousness and practices of the workplace. That is the committees, school management teams, school governing bodies, teachers, learners, and support staff. Ensure that prevention and mitigation strategies are infused into the policies, protocols, and guidelines of the workplace. Next slide, please. Advocacy. Supports and undertake information dissemination activities that aim to raise awareness of GBV, as well as combat discrimination and other underlying aspects of GBV at the school. Then the last one is workplace GBV committees, and they must ensure the establishment of school-based GBV units, that's committees in the operational structures and rules of procedures in the workplace. Ensure that the committees are functional in effectively addressing all incidents of GBV in the workplace according to the standards operating procedures which outline roles and responsibilities of the relevant actors. Next slide, please. Schools community mobilization. Ensure that the school builds the capacity of individuals to protect themselves and recover from acts of GBV, including encouraging and promoting equal participation of men and women in the various school activities, sports, recreational, cultural, and spiritual, and many more. Coordinating work actively with relevant actors, including national, local and traditional authorities, cultural and religious bodies, security forces, law enforcement officials, civil society groups, and others to ensure effective prevention and response. For example, here, if the school is situated in isolation, maybe the people that are along the school, the parents that are there, the governing body as well, needs to work with the school in order for their children to be in a good school, as well as to be in a good to be protected in a very good way, so that they are not harmed by anyone. Physical safety and security. Take action to improve safety and security in and around the school, paying particular attention to locations where acts of GBV have previously occurred or are likely to occur, including food distribution sites, water points, areas for firewood collection, toilets, and other public spaces, meaning that even at school, whenever the learners are out on breaks, or maybe they are having their own lunch, the teachers should be there to check whether the children are really safe wherever they are. Health. Ensure that there are adequate and confidential protocols for basic healthcare needs of victims or survivors of GBV. Next slide, please. Assessment and analysis. Ensure that assessment analysis mechanisms are in place to detect, identify, and reflect systematic GBV in the schools, where we are saying now the teachers or anyone who is there, the group, the committee that is there, must make it a point that there's a policy at hand where they are able to identify a learner that has been has gone through this violence or this GBV, and then be able to help that particular learner in all spheres. And then justice. Ensure that victims, survivors have access to confidential counseling about legal or other avenues of redress. For example, you find that the learner has been abused and is scared to go to the teacher or maybe to another person to tell the person. Why? Because the child has been intimidated, and that particular person has said, if you ever tell someone, then I'm going to kill you. So the child knows nothing, still very young, and then he ends up not telling anyone, and he confides to himself. And that on its own, that is a cancer, as other members have said, that needs to be taken away from these people that are doing this unruly thing. Skills training. Promote or provide full and adequate access for learners to participate in skills training programs can strengthen self-reliance and economic independence. Next slide, please. In conclusion, as now we are saying GBV in the workplace should be prohibited through policies, programs, legislation, and other measures, followed by appropriate implementation. The workplace is a suitable location for GBV prevention through educating women and men about both its discriminatory nature and the productivity and health impacts that it has on the victims and survivors. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hans. Indeed, with very clear recommendations, which I believe that in coming engagement, we will take those forward. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. As we then move on and call upon Mrs. Therona Mudli from NAPTOSA. Mrs. Therona Mudli. Ms. Therona Mudli has been employed by NAPTOSA for the past 12 years. She is driven by a quest for fairness and justice in the workplace for all employees and realizes her passion for empowerment through the professional development arm of NAPTOSA. She lives by the motto that leadership is not about titles and positions, but it's about growing and empowering others. Mrs. Therona is a qualified CCMA commissioner and uses her skills in resolving labor disputes and negotiations in the provincial ELRC, as well as the PSCBC. Therona, we are all yours from NAPTOSA. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. Greetings to the Minister, the Deputy Minister, HODs and MECs present, my colleagues from the other unions, and all other protocols observed. I want to thank you for this opportunity to present on this very important topic in a month of history in our country. However, I must say that the screams of the women in our country due to being stabbed, assaulted, strangled, raped, and killed were not loud enough this month of August, because the perpetrators went on unabated with committing the heinous crimes that they do. It has been a horrific month for us. It's been a shocking month for us. And as a country, we need to come together to actually stop the scourge of gender-based violence in our society. So it should have been a month to celebrate Women's Month. However, many families found that it was for them to either identify their loved ones in a mortuary or to bury their loved ones. And it has been a sad start and a sad occurrence this month especially. Femicide program director in our country is 5 times higher than the global average. And that is something that we need to digest and we need to actually wrap our heads around. And it is for that reason that this webinar today, based on this topic, is so much more relevant and so appreciated. So thank you to the Minister for hosting us on this virtual webinar today to add our voices of support in terms of what it is that is happening around us. As a country, as I said, it is time for us to come together. 56 years ago, women in our country marched on the union buildings. However, it seems that we are actually now, more than ever, have become more vulnerable than ever. Program Director, I haven't been given much time today, so I just want to be very focused on specifically school-related gender-based violence, as this is the sector that we're addressing. And I want to also bring into focus the NACTOSA perspective specifically, the strategies and the interventions that NACTOSA has put in place as a union to address this very important topic. Now, can I have the next slide, please? Yes. No,
He's only starting now. Okay.
So this is where we are at. Yes, thank you. Well, my colleagues before me have actually introduced the textbook definition of what gender-based violence is specifically. And I want to talk today and this afternoon specifically about school-related gender-based violence. And that is the textbook definition of what school-related gender-based violence is. And just today, I must say to you, Program Director, and the audience that I saw 2 videos of girls in a bullying situation assaulting each other. So when we talk about gender-based violence, it's not specifically opposite genders that are actually bullying each other, being violent with each other, or having some kind of sexual connotation to it. It can be women on women, men on men, because it's a much broader term. Gender is a much broader term than men and women specifically. So that's basically the textbook definition of what school-related gender-based violence is. And more specific to this, and this is what I want to actually talk about, is what are our perceptions and our concepts of violence? What is our concepts of the role of women and how we actually perceive women? And we had speakers before this talk about, and I was very interested to hear the cultural dynamic that adds to how we view and how we perceive women. And much of our cultures, how we were raised, how we raise our boys and girls also add to this dynamic of what gender is and how women specifically must be perceived in our society, in our country, and within our communities. So being more specific to education here, I want to talk about the role that educators have, and the minister also spoke about socialization being part of the classroom genre and being part of the dynamic in the classroom. Socialization as teachers is very much our responsibility. How we educate our boys, how we educate our girls is our responsibility. And when I thought about this dynamic, I thought it's an unintended consequence of being a teacher. But it's not an unintended consequence. It's a direct consequence of us being in the classroom, having those young minds to actually mold, and having that opportunity, which many professions don't have, to actually inculcate in these young boys and girls respect for each other, speaking out when when you become a victim, becoming brave and becoming confident. And that is the role that we as teachers have in the classroom. So for those teachers out there who are actually listening, don't underestimate your role in actually eliminating this completely. And it's very possible from our schools, from our society, from our country, and from our communities. Teachers, you definitely have a role to play, and we need to, as it was said previously during this webinar, bring the parents in. And by bringing the parents in, we are going to bring the communities in, and we can definitely see light at the end of this dark, dingy tunnel that we find ourselves in now. So teachers, you have the power in your classrooms to actually eliminate this. Can I go on to the next slide? I've heard the previous speakers, if not all of the speakers, speak about Ngos. This was tragic, it was shocking, it was frightening, and more especially, it was so painful that this university student, who actually aspired to become a constitutional court judge, had to have her life ended by somebody that she dearly loved. The gruesome nature of this murder will stay with us forever. But let me just say to you, just in this month, Ngos was not the only perpetrator. She was not the only victim. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about other victims in this very month. And I'm going to focus on this month because it's very present. But it doesn't mean that this doesn't happen in any other months of the year. It's an ongoing disease or pandemic, as was said by another speaker in our country. So we all know, because this was really widely published in the media, because of its gruesome nature, her dismembered body was found in different parts. Some of it was found in her boyfriend's apartment, others were found in his room, and some in a suitcase somewhere. And the gruesome nature shocked us. And what is the reality is this: after 2 or 3 weeks from now, we will forget about Ngos. Because when the media highlights things and webinars like this, when we talk about these things, it becomes a momentary thing. We need to have a long, enduring, sustainable plan and strategy to put in place to end this. We cannot only highlight it during the month of August. We cannot always speak about it and get onto social media platforms when it happens, like when this happened to Ngos. Let me just tell you what happened to Fikile Chilisa. She's a 70-year-old, and she's from KZN. What happened to her was she went to the SASSA offices to actually collect her SASSA grant, but she went missing. And a day or two later, she was found on a highway in KwaZulu-Natal, specifically in Durban. She's a 70-year-old who was found half naked. A post-mortem revealed that she had been strangled to death. She had also been raped, and she had one of her eyes that had been removed. Now, this will give you goosebumps. It's scary, but it's a reality. So besides Ngos and what happened to Fikile happened just 2 weeks ago. Now, nobody is actually protected or detached from this kind of thing, because even a police constable was found, and I'm just going to look at it quickly. A police constable was being physically abused by her partner. And when it was reported, she had cried out for help, and when it was actually reported, she died. She was 32 years old, and she died last Saturday from the assault. And this was in the Free State, by the way. And having been a police officer, you'd think she'd be strong enough to stand up to the abuse and the assault. She would know her rights and talk up about the ongoing assault. Unfortunately, she was a victim, and her body too was found just outside Ritz in the Free State, and it was actually found that she was also strangled to death. So Nosile is one of many women, and I've just given you two other instances of what has happened this month in August. So definitely our country is reaching pandemic proportions when it comes to gender-based violence against women, and it's not something that we can overlook very easily, but it must not be something we can forget very easily. It must be at the back of our minds, because we have, as teachers, the power to change this and to give ourselves the freedom as women to be what we want to, when we want to, how we want to, but more importantly, to speak up and be brave about speaking up. And the next slide, please. I want to specifically talk about the union's role, and specifically NATOSA's role, and what it is that we have done to actually put in place structures and strategies and interventions to actually try to minimize and eliminate school-related gender-based violence specifically. Now, Education International has passed a resolution in 2015 calling on governments to promote child protection and protection of education personnel across all government ministries, and to impose education ministries and their partners an obligation to include teachers and educators' unions to create systems and mechanisms to respond to school-related gender-based violence in educational settings. Now, for some of us who are not familiar with what Education International is, it is a conglomerate of global teacher unions. And this was a resolution that all member unions had to abide by and develop a framework in where the unions in specific develop the framework for school-related gender-based violence, but also taking into account what our government ministries can do. And it is for this reason that this resolution is so appropriately finding itself on this forum with the ministry present here as well, with the DBE officials here as well as our provincial officials, to actually look with some kind of introspection what it is as the Department of Basic Education we can do to eliminate and minimize school-related gender-based violence. So NATOSA is, of course, a member. Can we go back to that slide, please? Is a member of school-related gender-based violence. We had previous speakers talk about the ILO, which I'm not going to talk about, but we are also, as EI members, part of the United Nations Women. And I was fortunate to actually be a representative of Education International on this year's Commission on the Status of Women that was hosted by the United Nations Women, and the Gender Equality Forum that was hosted by Mexico and France, Paris to be specific. And on this forum, I was brought to realize and made to realize that gender-based violence is not specific and unique to our country. It is a global phenomenon. And what was raised and what was so, which brought us together really as global members, is that, it's happening all over the world. And the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has exacerbated gender-based violence in other countries as well as in our own country. So we have a lot more in common in terms of the other countries as well. It's a battle and it's a challenge out there as well. But I believe that to get together, collaborating with the unions and the Department of Basic Education, with our minds put together, definitely as a collective, we can make a difference. So at a global level, this is where NATOSA fits in, and this is where we had to find our strategy and our intervention. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm not going to go into this because many of the previous speakers have spoke about the legislative framework in terms of which our country operates, and Ella gave us a really good rundown in terms of SACE and the Professional Code of Ethics. And we know that all teachers have to be affiliated with SACE, and we understand that SACE is very active in investigating gender-based violence in schools, sanctioning members as well. And we also heard from the General Secretary of the ELRC talk about inquiry by arbitrator, which has been a progressive way in which the Bargaining Council is actually able to deal with educators specifically who are engaging and being perpetrators of gender-based violence in our schools. But what I must say about legislation is that yes, we have legislation that actually attempts to address gender-based violence, specifically school gender-based violence as well. The implementation is the problem. We have challenges with implementation, and I want to reach out to the DBE and the provincial education departments to ensure that implementation is quick, effective, and efficient. When there is a complaint against another educator in a school for harassment or violence of any kind of any nature, we as unions, we expect the Department of Education to act quickly, decisively, and effectively, because any justice delayed is actually justice denied. And this is the challenge, and this is the challenge I would put out there to the DBE. Please take these complaints from the unions, from our members, from your employees very seriously, and please act on it, because you can lead by example. I also want to put out a cautionary note there that in terms of the Employment of Equity Act, an employer whose attention was raised to any kind of harassment in the workplace, and if such an employer actually ignores this and does not put in place measures and assists to minimize or address the harassment in the workplace, then that employer is vicariously liable, which means you are as guilty as the perpetrator. And putting on my union hat here, I want to say that we would not want the DBE to be vicariously liable because of delaying any action against harassment in any workplace. And this is what must be addressed very quickly. We're not finding that there is a very quick response time, but hopefully we're going to be engaging with the department to actually see that this response time is actually speeded up, so we can actually address these issues in the schools, in the workplaces, in the district offices as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. So how did NAPTOSA respond to eliminating or minimizing school-related gender-based violence? What we actually did was in 2016, August to be specific, we, the NEC of NAPTOSA, adopted the NAPTOSA's Srgbv framework. And this framework sets out the union's plan of actions and our goals. It sets out our activities for eradicating Srgbv at a national level, at a provincial level, and at the school level. So this framework actually coordinates structures to address Srgbv within the schools. It directs schools to remedial action and preventative interventions. And this is a hands-on approach that NAPTOSA has initiated as an intervention for Srgbv. We also facilitate and drive leadership interventions for women. Women are our focus in a large way due to the fact also that 75% of our membership are women. And I'm not sure what the stats are, but women dominate the education sector in terms of employees as well. So this is what we've done as an NEC at a national level. We have introduced what is the National Srgbv Change Team, and this is made up of 4 national members headed by the Vice President of NAPTOSA, who then partners with the provinces to put in place strategies and programs to eliminate Srgbv in the schools. And this is NAPTOSA's take, and this is our strategy on Srgbv. We also look at partnering with NGOs. I know in some of our provinces we've partnered with the Legal Resource Center. We've invited them through to actually give our members who are in the classrooms hands-on training into how it is that they must handle Srgbv reported matters in their schools, and how it is that they must also speak out when they are victims of this. We've also engaged with the child welfare in various provinces and districts to actually assist us with their expertise and coming on board in terms of dealing with Srgbv in the classroom specifically. Next slide, please. NAPTOSA has also gone a step further, and we have adopted the Charter of Professionalism in 2013, and this is the responsibility that is entrusted to us to uphold the dignity of our profession, to refrain from inappropriate relationships with learners. And this charter has been adopted by every single member of NATOSA in order to hold you responsible. Since you've adopted this Charter of Professionalism, it will hold you responsible to if you ever breach any of the clauses in this Charter of Professionalism. The NATOSA Constitution as well does have many clauses in there, but one of them specifically I wanted to highlight is that a member may be disciplined for conducting themselves in an inappropriate, disgraceful or unacceptable manner. And if you are found contravening this, you may actually be removed as a member of NATOSA pending the decision of our disciplinary committee. So as a union, we have put in place very formal structures that actually are very hands-on when it comes to its implementation, and we do not hesitate to actually implement these structures in our provinces and at our schools. So we as a union have been very proactive in terms of dealing with Srgbv specifically. Next slide. Our approach, hands-on again, is to host events that focus on gender issues and Srgbv. Recently, we hosted the author Vanessa Govender-Tedder, who spoke to us about her book outlining her biography, actually, of the abuse that she suffered, and we had members engage with her first-hand knowledge and information that she shared with them, assisting them and building strength in them as how to actually combat and speak out if you are a victim. We also recently hosted Iman Rapeti, which was just last week, where she spoke about her ordeals, her experiences, and where and how she found the strength to actually overcome violence and discrimination in her life as well. Our programs also go to sensitizing school communities, and as I've heard other speakers talk about bringing in the communities, we do have programs that actually bring in school governing bodies who then must liaise with the communities to actually eliminate and address and bring attention to this very important topic. We look at forming clubs in schools. We identify activities in schools through debates, through identifying topics that children could debate about, write essays about, enter competitions about. So it's very hands-on, and it brings about an interaction with the learners and the teachers as well. We have already partnered with the Department of Social Development, with the Department of Health and Justice, with SAPs and religious leaders, and this was NATOSA's way of engaging with other stakeholders that are in government departments, that are in the communities. And we also heard previous speakers talk about religious leaders. They have a lot of influence in our communities, and we started bringing them in to address our school governing body component and those stakeholders that have a direct role in the communities. We've also looked at ways to actually incorporate principles of Srgbv in the curriculum, and I will show you that in our presentation, how it practically found itself in the schools. Next slide, please. And this is how it found itself in the schools. This is a school in Escort. To be specific, it's Escort Secondary School in KwaZulu-Natal. And last week, the school held a silent protest on school-related gender-based violence. This is the grade 12 learners, and it was part of their life orientation project. So this is how NATOSA infuses school-related gender-based violence into the curriculum. Our teachers are aware, because of the training that we have with our teachers on a regular basis. It's a common thread that must run through the curriculum, and we must infuse it in the curriculum. And this is how it found itself to be practical. Learners made posters. They took to the school grounds. It was a silent protest, and this is what they did to actually bring focus to it, but also to make themselves aware. And we can see the boys were very active in the program as well, to let both boys and girls understand the concept of school-related gender-based violence. These are grade 12 learners who will be out there in the world next year. Even in the schools, they could be victims and subjects of gender-based violence. So this was our way of infusing it in the curriculum. Next slide, please. These are the posters that the children made. They put on their own slogans onto it. They carried it around, and it was all for assessment purposes as well. So it actually brings assessment, it brings schooling, it brings learning, and it also creates an awareness of the gender-based violence that is finding itself in our communities and our schools. The next slide, please. Next slide. These are NAPTOSA members in a particular school, and this was during the 16 days of activism. NAPTOSA had a program in place during this period of time when the country observes, or the world observes, 16 days of activism, and we called on our members to actually wear all black on a particular day and go to school. It was their way of signifying the mourning that we feel to the women that have lost their lives to gender-based violence. And this was just one of the schools that heeded the call of NAPTOSA, wore black, and showed solidarity with others who have found themselves to be victims, lost their lives, and also may have been assaulted, and just basically scarred, emotionally and physically and mentally scarred with having been victims of gender-based violence. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am just showing you some, some practical ways in which NAPTOSA as a union has given it our own flavor in terms of finding our strategies and interventions to actually bring attention to this very important topic. And we don't just do it throughout the month of August or through 16 days of activism. We try to infuse it in all our programs and our events throughout the year. Next slide, please. This is the Eastern Cape, and they had a meeting, or they had a webinar on the short skirt syndrome, which we all know. It was also addressing gender-based violence and the whole concept of what women wear and how women dress, and that whole debate. I shouldn't even call it a debate. It shouldn't be a debate, but the rhetoric about how women dress and how they fit into this whole gender-based violence issue. All our news flashes, our internal and external focus as well, focuses on school-related gender-based violences. News flashes is our communication method where we communicate with all our members at a national and provincial level. So we actually use that forum and that medium to actually raise attention to gender-based violence. We also have dedicated pages in our diary, our NAPTOSA diary, which every single member gets. And we raise attention through this diary as well in terms of school-related gender-based violence. Wherever we have an opportunity in the media, having to highlight or give comment on this particular topic, and NAPTOSA is very vocal about it, showing our strength and showing our support to the victims as well. Our programs, as I've just shown you, it finds itself in the classroom, it finds itself on the school grounds, it finds itself in the staff rooms, and this is how we get the message across. Our professional development programs, our Professional Development Institute itself is where we amongst all our other programs that we have for the year, we also have programs directly related to school-related gender-based violence. And here we have, we provide support. We teach and train teachers how to deal with learners who have come to them and taken them into their confidence and confided in them that they are victims of gender-based violence. So we train teachers how to provide mental and psychological support to this. And here's another shout out to the DBE. We need counsellors in schools to address this. We need counsellors in schools to provide support to our learners out there. In our way, we are doing what we can to train and to encourage our teachers, to give them the background and the understanding as to how to provide support to their colleagues, to other teachers as well as learners. So that is our way in which we are actually trying to contribute to assisting in this manner. So our programs are directed at empowering our members into dealing with this at a school level. Next slide, please. This was an initiative by Education International as well, and this was where NAPTOSA, together with 8 other unions, collaborated in an attempt to actually provide empower teachers to become change agents in their schools and in their classrooms. So this program happened between 2016 and 2019, and we, as a collective, these 8 unions in 7 African countries comprised of 1 million teachers. And that was our aim during these 3 years, 2016 to 2019, to encourage and empower teachers to become change agents in their classes and in their schools to eliminate gender-based violence in schools. And that was another intervention and program that NATOSA actually engaged on a level in our continent, attempting to get to at least 1 million teachers as a collective with the other unions. Next slide, please. Now, very interestingly, just a week ago, after I knew I had to do this presentation, this is an absolute direct testimony from one of our members who has been a victim of school-related gender-based violence inflicted on her by another colleague in her school. This is from a teacher in KwaZulu-Natal. And I wish I could have gone through her entire report. It's actually heart-wrenching to read her entire report. But I thought what I want to pull out is just 2 paragraphs in terms of what she says. And, you know, if you really look at every word and digest it, it could actually, you know, it actually gives you goosebumps, because this is an absolute reality. It isn't a cut and paste from a textbook or from some person's dissertation. This is one of our members 2 weeks ago who spoke to us about her ordeal. And I don't have time to get into it. I really wish I could actually present what has happened to her. But hopefully if we have follow-ups, we'll be able to share actual experiences of our members in schools. So she says that the amount of physical pain I am currently feeling from being assaulted and pushed against the wall is unbearable. More than anything currently, I fear what he will do to me outside of work, as he so vehemently promised to attack and beat me up and teach me a lesson as he so longed. This is a clear indication to me that Mr. Matabela has deep-seated hatred towards me and women in general. This is evident from his persistent uttering of profanity and vulgar words directed at me in front of Mrs. Nkube and Mrs. Gune, who's the departmental head, where he continued calling me a whore regardless of the presence of other females. And just to tell you very quickly, this is from a departmental head who was physically assaulted and sworn at in front of her class of learners and other colleagues in the school. The humiliation she's felt, the degradation she's felt is insurmountable. And this is what NATOSA is actually assisting her with at this moment. So this is a reality, ladies and gentlemen. This is happening in the staff rooms, it's happening in the schools, it's happening in the playgrounds. It's not something out of a textbook. This is what we are faced with, and as unions, we have to very quickly respond and get the support of the department to deal with these kind of perpetrators that are finding themselves in the schools. Next slide, please. I want to say and end off by saying, you know, we can, we shall, and we will. Wherever there's a problem, there has to be a solution. Wherever there's a challenge, we must take it up and deal with it. We have to deal with the patriarchal stereotypes that find themselves in our classrooms. Teachers are professionals, and as I've said previously from the testimony of the member, she's a victim, and the perpetrator is another teacher who we'd expect to be an educated person, to be a person who has some kind of insight into what is going to happen to him. There has to be consequences that will happen to him. And it's about setting precedents in schools with perpetrators, setting hard examples so that we can actually eliminate this, because really it is within our lifetime that this has to be eliminated. We cannot pass on this kind of a situation to the generations to come. So, Minister, MECs, this is a challenge to us all that we must embrace, we must take on, and we definitely, with the collaboration and the support of each other, we can actually see light at this dark, as I said, dark, dingy tunnel. Thank you so much for hosting this webinar, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to actually present on this topic that's really close to my heart. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Verona. It is indeed moving and it's very disturbing. But thank you so much for sharing with us that testimony. It really shows that these things are real and they are happening right in our doorsteps. So we really need to take a very hard stance against these perpetrators. Thank you so much for your presentation. As we now move to the last teacher union to present, South African Democratic Teachers Union, SATU, that will be represented by Ms. Dudu Ngosi. Ms. Dudu Ngosi was first elected a school representative at Esikisini Primary School in Atteridgeville, where she was employed as an English and natural science teacher. In 2009, she was by-elected into the position of Regional Deputy Chair in Gauteng North Region. In 2011, she was elected as Deputy Provincial Secretary at the Provincial Triennial Conference, also serving in full-time capacity for the Union at that level. She's currently serving as a member of the National Working Committee as well as the member of the National Executive Committee of SATU as a Vice President for Gender. That is her current position that he occupies. Moyapil, we are all yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Mr. Khalurale, and good afternoon to yourself. May I also greet the Honorable Minister, Mama Andrew Musaha in absentia, and further greet the DM, Dr. Regina Mhaule, MECs from provinces present here, presenters that would have participated in the program just before us, and my colleagues from other unions and all protocol observed. We're delighted as SATU to also be granted an opportunity to make a submission today to this all-important ministerial seminar and share with colleagues our attempts as a union in combating sexual harassment and the GBV in the workplace. We must appreciate the good work, Program Director, in terms of presentations by all the participants that would have come before us. They would have captured succinctly and were spot on in terms of defining what GBV is and school-related gender-based violence, patriarchy, and sexual harassment are. Our presentation will not delve much on that, but it envisages to highlight a few aspects of where we are as an organization insofar as combating the unfortunate scourge of GBV. As a union, we are moving from intention to action. In other words, we're no longer wanting to explain what GBV would be and be academic about it. We now want to implement some of the resolutions that would have been taken. Our first slide outlines the 9 focus areas we wished to share with yourselves. However, Program Director, due to time constraints, we may not be able to go through all of them. We shall endeavor to summarize slides in order to give a sense of what they are about, rather than reading them verbatim. Can we move to the next slide on the 9th Congress? The emphasis on this slide is on claiming our right to have our dignity and safety protected and respected. It is further to ensure implementing resolutions as guided by Congress in 2019. We are on course in implementing these resolutions and consolidating going forward. On organizational discipline, our Congress would have declared that the Code of Conduct, as provided for in our Constitution, forms the only legal contract between a member and the union, and any violation of such strips one of his or her membership of the union in pursuit of the highest ethical and revolutionary leadership within the union. May we then go to the next slide? You would see program director that I'm galloping. On this slide, we are dealing with enabling systemic structures. Our union is guided by the following documents: the SATU gender policy document and SATU code of conduct, the SAYS code of good of conduct, and the collective agreements to promote acceptable behavior in the workplace. Policy implementation, in our view, is critical because it will create an environment to eradicate GBV and eradicate barriers to equal participation in the union, workplace, and the society. Our SATU constitution allows our structures from branches to the national level to conduct disciplinary hearings against our members who would, in the view of the structure, have violated the code. Can we move to the next slide, please? On slide number four, there are two key aspects of SATU gender policy. I think that will be the next structure. I mean, the next slide. Yes, thank you very much. Our mission is to empower members to promote professional development and create a safe and mutually respectful learning environment. And our goals will be to eradicate GBV and other forms of violence against women, girls, and boys, including LGBTIQA+, and to recognize and provide for inclusion of people with special needs. Can we please go to the next slide? On slide number 5, our guiding principles, therefore, are that women's rights are human rights, breaking patriarchy and gender stereotypes. You would have realized and listened to how all the presenters almost would have spoken so deeply about patriarchy, which in our view is the biggest driver of GBV. Recognition that men and boys have a positive role to play, and eradication of sexual harassment within the union. Can we go to the next slide and skip slide 6 on thematic areas and go to slide 7, which deals with union programs? Thank you very much. On this slide, the union programs on GBV would look at what the union normally would want to do. The union periodically creates and funds engagement platforms for leaders and members through workshops, seminars, conferences, structural meetings at all levels up to the branch, from national up to the branches, to discuss, among other things, the following: gender and sexual harassment policies, gender and inclusivity, principal seminars, and so on. The next slide, please. On slide number 8, on information sharing, we, as a union, would recognize and commemorate national days year in and year out without fail. And we do this 4 times a year. Every year, 4 times, these activities are taking place. In March, normally, it is the International Women's Day that we shall celebrate. We, among other things, will be discussing the role of women, gender equity, etc. And in July is our Men's Month. We run men's fora, seminars, men's health promotion, etc. And in August, we celebrate the National Women's Day, wherein we discuss economic liberation of women, equity and personal development, access to decision-making positions, etc. And also in the last term of the year, we celebrate the 16 days of activism, which then would stretch from the 25th of November up to the 10th of December. Can we then go to the next slide? And then go and skip the next slide, go to slide 10, where we refer to representation of members. SATU was responsible for the ELRC collective agreement number 3 of 18, which the General Secretary of the ELRC earlier on would have alluded to in terms of its broad objectives and so on. So we were responsible for that collective agreement, which in our view is central to eradicating sexual offences in the world of work. Representation is a member's prerogative, and we hold that view that our members must be represented because it is their prerogative when and as and when they are accused of or are alleged to have committed some acts of misconduct by the employer. Because we think the prerogative right of our members to observe the process and ensure fairness and justice is key. However, this right does not mean condoning misbehavior, but it ensures that the member understands the case and what is at stake in order to make informed decisions. Can we go to the next slide and skip that slide and go to slide 11 that speaks of increased reach? COVID-19 would have dictated different ways of attending mass-based meetings and big gatherings of our union. We have since 2020 succeeded in conducting online webinars and thus attracting a huge following and attendance as opposed to when meetings would have been conducted face-to-face. Our first online event was the Women's Day celebration in 2020, August, and it attracted more than 5,000 attendees online and so on, and even in the Zoom room. There are many other activities, as you note on the slide, that we would have organized successfully online. Your Women's Day for 2021, we just recently celebrated it, and the following was huge as well on our pages of the social media. And the Men's Forum, which also was a huge hit, wherein our male champions within the organization gave inputs on gender-based violence. Mr. Shai, who would have presented here earlier on, was also part of that activity and webinar. We then want to go to slide number 12 that speaks of multi-stakeholder partnership. Thank you. Combating GBV and its impact will not be achievable without partnerships. Our partners include other unions, the EI, as you would know, that were a member union to that structure of the Education International. The African Women in Education Networks is another partner that we work hand in hand with. The Gender at Work Labor Research Services, the Metropolitan Health, wherein our members are assisted in terms of psychosocial telecounseling. Each time our members, because we all know that COVID and other related issues at school level are bringing a lot of distress on our members. So we have a partnership that we run with Metropolitan where there's a teledoctor. Our members are able to telephonically receive that counseling from that doctor. We also have a relationship as an affiliate of COSATU in the programs that COSATU undertakes. One of the critical programs that COSATU is working on is around the International Labour Organization Convention 190. We regret that our country would not have up to this stage ratified that convention 2 years down the line. And we are hoping in due course, as we would have listened earlier on, that there are strides to try and ratify that convention, because in our view, we think it is one other convention that will assist us in terms of curbing this scourge of gender-based violence, because it also does not relate to only school environments. It speaks about protection of women in the world of work, and not in the workplace, but the world of work generally. And therefore, we're thinking we must take from countries that would have ratified convention. Your countries like Fiji and Uruguay and Namibia, these are the countries that would have been proactive. They've already signed, and we're thinking our president going forward will also allow us that opportunity if we're all serious in terms of addressing the gender-based violence. Can we then go to the next slide? And the next slide is on recommendations. Our research unit within SATU would have conducted a research on GBV and school-related gender-based violence, and a few recommendations are penned here. The first recommendation is to tackle GBV in schools and as a whole sector, approach involving DPE, teacher unions, and related stakeholders is necessary to ensure that the messages are consistent and reinforced. I think I must read again that one. To tackle GBV in schools, a whole sector approach involving DPE, teacher unions, and related stakeholders is necessary to ensure that the messages are consistent and reinforced. Given that some teachers are perpetrators of abuse and others victims, strategies to address GBV must acknowledge and address both teachers and learners' experiences so that constructive and collaborative relationships can be encouraged. The next bullet says, studies have shown that the use of multimedia can be advantageous to help change the mindset and engage the communities. To effectively eliminate and abuse of girl child, there must be a system cultural change in the value of girls. There must be a system of enlightenment and to dispel the myths and thoughts at the low value of the girl child compared to the boy child. Next slide. To rectify gender violence, men must understand the power in gender relations and become role models to increase equity. It is necessary to review the implementation process of girls' education movement in the areas of training, goal setting, and requires a need assessment at every level from national to the grassroots community level. DPE must undertake capacity building programs and allocate and distribute resources within the provincial and local school levels. On school violence prevention initiatives should be evidence-based. This necessitates the development of an evidence base of what works and what does not work in violence preventing in South Africa. This will ensure that resources and efforts are targeted where they are most likely to be effective. Program director, these are some of the recommendations that would have been crafted from the research that we would have done. There are findings, unfortunately, we're not able to come and bring and share them here. But however, this is what we think as we move forward. We're making these recommendations known to yourselves that as an organization, we shall be working on them because they just came in not long ago. Having said that, let me take this opportunity to thank the Department of Basic Education for having given us this opportunity to come and express a view or so in terms of trying to curb gender-based violence. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ngos. Clear recommendations. Hopefully, we'll find a way of still engaging further on some of those jointly with all other trade unions as to how then do we take forward all the recommendations that would have come up from there. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I think, colleagues, this has brought us now to the end of the presentation by all the presentations by the teacher unions, which then takes us straight into the last but one session, just a brief one that just summarizes some of the recommendations that are there. But we must indicate that as we'll be dealing with the recommendations have been captured but they're still going to be well documented. We just want to give an overview of those recommendations that we're able to capture, which will still be worked into a properly structured document and so forth moving forward, so that then we are able to develop some programs out of there moving forward. As we call upon Ntate Tsekere Maponya to give us the recommendations as he has captured them. Ntate Maponya.
Good afternoon, Chair, and to all the colleagues here present. Thank you for this opportunity. Also, good afternoon to the Minister and the Deputy Minister, the DG, MECs and HODs in the provinces, and leaders of the teacher unions. I'm going to quickly rush through, as Chair has indicated, that we will seek to try and be brief, with the view that we'll compile a more comprehensive document that we're going to use for us to consolidate the recommendations emanating from today's engagement. Apologies, I'm trying to work out my slides here. Shouldn't take long. Okay, here we go. So okay, my screen is frozen, but I think it's coming. Struggling with this here. Sorry, apologies. All right, I think it's on now. Check. So the seminar today was aimed at trying to help us to come up with mechanisms to deal with sexual harassment and gender-based violence in the workplace. And all the speakers have addressed various aspects of how we can achieve this. The Minister started us off by contextualizing the environment under which gender-based violence occur and sexual harassment, especially in the workplace, by indicating that one of the key issues is to address toxic masculinity, which is also premised on the issue of patriarchy. So those are the key issues that the Minister highlighted to us that we need to try and address. But also, one of the key things that the Minister indicated to us was that we need to ensure that all our children learn under a nurturing environment, but this has to be under the circumstances where the issue of gender is not in question. I also received a presentation from Tate Shai from Kulumandoda. He gave us some key thoughts for men in this area, to say that men should play key roles in preventing gender-based violence and sexual harassment. If a person that you are talking to seems to have those tendencies, you must talk to that person. And if you're unable to talk to that person, or if they are not in line with what you're trying to advise them, then you should report the matter or report the person for their behavior. And men must also preempt this kind of behavior, and all men must act responsibly by calling out those who make disparaging and objectifying remarks about women. Also, on the key role that men have to play in our society and in our work environment, in our schools, is to play a supportive role. So men should support victims of gender-based violence and call each other out. He mentioned the issue of how when men are meeting in their corners, they tend to make disparaging comments about their female counterparts, and sometimes even, unfortunately, against our learners. Men should also enforce the sense of mutual respect and should stop objectifying women and their bodies. There should also be a sense of equality where men should mobilize and be in a state of alert to prevent the perpetuation of gender-based violence and femicide and protect women. The issue of the Bill of Rights, I think, came from various speakers, that it's something that should be promoted, including the promotion of the safety and well-being of our women and girl children. On the issue of women, this was covered by Miss the lady from the director from the Department of Constitutional Development, to say that women should break the silence. So one of the key issues that has been highlighted is that what perpetuates gender-based violence and indeed sexual harassment is that women are ashamed of talking about their experiences. of being violated, or if maybe somebody has spoken to them in such a way that they feel uncomfortable, then they then tend to keep it to themselves. He said that women should lift the shame, so they must stop. Women must stop stigmatizing one another. If a person has been sexually harassed, molested, or even received untoward comments from a man, it shouldn't be promoted, shouldn't be a laughing matter, but the shame should be lifted. And the shame, the blame should be shifted, in that the shame should be with the abuser and not the abused. I think we saw a video of a young, beautiful lady who was set alight, and she suffered a really extensive burns. And when she came back from hospital, I think we did hear that the perpetrator had spread the rumor that she was trying to commit suicide. So as such, then she was not able to report the matter. So because of shame. So we are saying here that the shame should be with the abuser and not with the abused. There are roles that so those are the key roles that needed to be played by the individuals or the separate genders, but there are things that we can do collectively, which was highlighted as having to start at home with parenting. We should capacitate our parents to promote values of love, respect, compassion, and dignity, because again, in the absence of this, we raise children who are angry, children who are disturbed, and then they act this out in the schools. And sometimes we see, even on social media, the perpetration of gender-based violence amongst our kids and learners as such. We should all take responsibility and accountability at an individual level to end gender-based violence. So if we hear that somebody is being abused, or if we know that somebody is being abused, or if you are witnesses to such behavior, we shouldn't keep quiet. We should take responsibility and accountability. And as such, we should be change agents at an individual level. And also we should choose to challenge gender disparities where they exist. We should engage in changing attitudes and thoughts that could translate into violence. Teachers should consider ways of engaging with parents to promote positive attitudes, especially among our learners and the young people that we have in our institutions. We should have all educators vetted against the National Register of Sexual Offenders. That's one of the things that we should ensure that is exercised diligently. All sexual crimes should be reported, including crimes against children and those who are mentally disabled. Then there's the issue of empowering our parents. I think this was emphasized by the GS of the LRC to say that we should look closely at the behavior of all our children in the school. I think as a teacher in the classroom, you're able to pick up when a child's behavior has changed, and sometimes it may be because they are abused in the home. We should create awareness. We should have more programs where we reach out to the communities and take our parents along so they can understand these issues. We should also come up with measures of reaching out to our communities to educate them not to ignore the science, even if it's not their children who are being abused, an educator. You know, sometimes we kind of turn a blind eye because maybe, you know, it's a neighbor's child, but then we should also take responsibility and accountability, as said in the previous point. And there should be programs meant to address GBV and sexual harassment. And this should not only be in August as we're celebrating here today, but there should be ongoing engagements and programs which help us to address the issue. And most importantly, in conclusion, is that fighting the scourge of GBV and sexual harassment requires the whole sector. It requires the Department of Basic Education. It requires the role of the teacher unions, SACE, and all different stakeholders in the sector to help us address these issues. And I think we've also noted in the latter part of the program where our teacher unions have indicated the different activities and the work that they are doing to combat this scourge in our society and in our schools as well. I thank you, and as indicated by the chairperson, we'll try to consolidate this into a more meaningful document, which will also inform programmatic action that should be undertaken. Thank you, Chairperson, and hand over back to you.
Thank you very much, Dade Maponya. like I've indicated, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, that at the end, we will be consolidating all the inputs as made, and then make sure that then we will share with all of your good selves as we shall be doing out our closeout report of the seminar, which shall be shared with yourselves. Thank you very much, Tate Maponya. As we now come to the last item, where we'll call upon Memukale just to come and do the vote of thanks to thank our participants, to thank our presenters and everybody else for having spent their time to participate in the seminar. Memukale.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I wish to first acknowledge the Honorable Minister in her absentia, the Deputy Minister, MEC, the heads of education departments, the Director General, Deputy Director Generals, the district directors that are amongst our midst, the circuit managers, and all the teachers who are present in this seminar. Before I begin, I would like to congratulate and thank the Department of Basic Education for taking an initiative to host this important event. The gender-based violence in education couldn't have come at the right time. Thank you, Department of Basic Education. Program Director, I would like to thank the speakers for their rich, insightful, and heartfelt contributions. Speakers from the guest speaker from Kulumandota, who provided us with the men's perspective into this painful topic. I would also like to thank the Department of Women and Persons with Disability, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, the LRC and SAIS for adding a crucial perspective to their discussion. Special thanks to the teacher unions, that is SATU, NAPTOSA, SAOU, NATU, and PEU. We don't forget the school governing body associations that were also present or in attendance in this seminar. Chairperson or Program Director, it is difficult to add much to the interesting and fruitful discussions we have we had today. We have seen the videos of teachers and learners talking about GBV. This left us with our eyes, ears, and our hearts full of stories of bravery and hope. We heard stories that will stay with us when we return to our offices, when we return to our schools, when we return to our homes, motivating us to take action against all forms of gender-based violence. All the speakers in this seminar has educated us that change is possible, and they have equipped us with many pieces of legislation that we must take home with. We have learned that change is what we must strive for. Program Director, today we have been reminded of the many women and young girls who have suffered throughout their lives and of the terrible consequences this gender-based violence has left them with. Let us remember what we have learned today, colleagues, and keep it on every social agenda that we have. Everyone deserves a life free from gender-based violence. Let's stop it even before it starts. Colleagues and all the participants, I thank your attention. Farewell. Thank you very much. Thanks, Program Director. And go well.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to all the participants, our presenters, and everybody who joined through various platforms. Thank you so much, and the seminar stands closed. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.